All right, so we're just going to say a few words, try to understand the Mokom Kodosh that we're standing by Rabbi Yehuda Lovi ben Betzalel, the MaHaral of Prague, born around approximately, although it's not really clear, 1512. It's interesting, two of the big Gedolim at the time, we're unclear about their exact time and date that they were born, both the Ramah and the MaHaral. He dies 1609. The MaHaral opened up a new spiritual depth of the understanding of Yiddishkeit, Yomim Tovim, the mitzvahs, a whole new level of depth of machshava in a very unique way. Anyone that's learned the Sefer Tanya knows that in the Shablat, in the opening page, the Heilige Balatanya, he writes that everything he writes in the Tanya is mipi Sfarim v'Sofrim. Who does he mean? He means the MaHaral of Prague and the Shla Kodesh. So it means that when you learn Tanya and you get Isoris from a Tanya, you realize that much of that came from right over here. The Makor was the MaHaral of Prague. Now I want to give you an idea of who the MaHaral had an influence on. So you should understand how the ripple effect of the MaHaral affects us ad hayom hazeh. The MaHaral had a huge influence of many Hasidic Rebbes and teachers, primarily, but only amongst them and many more. The Koznitzer Magid, Rabbi Yitzchak Mivorka, Rabbi Simcha ben Mipshischa, the Ishbitzer, the Kotzka, the Svasemes, Rabbi Tzadik HaKoyin, the Vilna Gaon, Rav Kook, Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, Rav Hutner, and many more. All throughout the generations of tzaddikim and gedolim that got their machshava, their chizuk, from the MaHaral of Prague. Now, even though the MaHaral was well known for the deep philosophy, much of his life he was known and very much involved in practical education, chinuch, communities, paskening many shilas. He was very against speaking in shul. He composed a tefillah against those that watch the people, specifically for those people that watch their mouth, to be careful not to speak in davening. It was called the Nachash, the snake. The Nun is the Ya Nesach. He was very involved in a certain tshuva, and Samach and the Endachov was for the Sichas Chulin. His Talmud, one of the many Talmidim, but one of the Talmidim of the MaHaral was, of course, the Tosfos Yontef. And the Tosfos Yontef, Kafi, the Anhogas of his Rabbi, was also very makbid on speaking during davening. And as we know, we have in yeshiva the tefillah of the Tosfos Yontef, how careful a person has to be about not speaking in davening, came from the MaHaral. The MaHaral was born in Poznan in Poland. He was born to immigrants from Germany. We don't know much about his rebbeim. Some say he learned on his own. He was eventually appointed Rav of Poznan. Later, eventually he was appointed Rav of Nikolsburg, and then of Prague, which before it became Czech Republic was Bohemia. He was a Poisik Alamdan, a Boki B'chola Torah Kula, and Kabbalah, a deep thinker in philosophy, astronomy, science, and much more. He's basically the bridge between the Rishonim and the Achronim living around the time of the Arizal. 1573, he moves to Prague for the very first time, after being the Rav in Nikolsburg for many years, successfully a Rav there, which again, being a Rav in a Europe community was not easy. It wasn't simple, but he managed. 1573, he comes to Prague for the first time. He was very critical of the mahalach that most yeshivas were using. We'll talk about it in a minute. He was the Rav of Prague. He was not the Rav of Prague at this time, but in 1583, he leaves Prague to go back to Poznan, his original hometown, where over there he was appointed as the Rav. In 1588, he returns to Prague, still not appointed as the Rav of Prague, but he was well known as one of the Gedolim. In 1592, he leaves Prague again, returns to Poznan, opens the yeshiva there, trading places with the Rav Mordechai Yaffa the Levush, and the Levush eventually they traded and he came back to Poznan when the MaHaral left. In 1597, the MaHaral returns to Prague for the very final time, and he remains here until he dies in 1609, and now he's the Rav. So it's interesting that he's known as the MaHaral of Prague, but he wasn't really the Rav here for many years, and it was only later on in his life that he held an official position as the Rav. When he died, he was replaced by the Kliyaka, which we're going to go just up the path in a few minutes. Something very unusual, he shares a tombstone with his wife, which is very, very unusual in those times. One of the strongest things, and I think this is an important idea to speak about, and I heard this from Aubrey Hirsch, he said a beautiful idea that he was very against, and he took stand against how to teach Torah in the proper way. And if you look in Tiferes Yisrael, Perek Nun Vav, if you look in the Gu'arya and Parashas V'eschanan, fascinating idea. He disagreed with all the Mahalchim that they were teaching in all the yeshivas in Europe at the time. Terrible. There was a type of a pilpul. We don't have it so much nowadays. A pilpul means going into depths of different Mahalchim and different ideas and, in Machshava on the Sugya. He was very, very against the Mahalach that most yeshivas were teaching at that time. And most sugyas and most Talmidim were busy explaining the Svaras and whatever it was. The MaHaral held it was the worst type of the way to teach. And he writes, and again I'm quoting Tiferes Yisrael, Gur Aryeh, I strengthened myself to change the situation and I was unsuccessful. I wrote letters to Gedolim in Lithuania and in Poland and I was not successful. And he writes, the shameful disgrace that we have deviated from the methods of previous Rishonim, all because of a claim that pilpul sharpens the mind. How can they say it sharpens the mind? All it does is confuse people and make for total stupidity. He felt that one of the main causes of the problem is because people are learning Tosfos way too early. And he said the reason that people are learning Tosfos too early is because Tosfos is written on the margin of the Gemara, it's printed on the daf. So the MaHaral wanted to make a Gemara without Tosfos. There should be no Tosfos on the side. And he did actually manage to finish printing that in that case. His idea was we need to understand Chumash, we need to understand Mishnayos way before we start learning Gemara in that way. Now I want to just tell you, and we'll end with two things. One is an idea brought down in the MaHaral, in Gur Aryeh. The other one is a story. The MaHaral writes about the time before Mashiach. What's going to be the time before Mashiach? How should we prepare ourselves before Mashiach comes? Listen to the MaHaral's idea, the machshava of a MaHaral. And as we always say when we go to Kfarim, we try to speak about the tzaddik and what he said and the Torah that he taught. Because Chazal tell us if we do that, the lips are moving. So we're moving the lips right now of the MaHaral. Says the MaHaral, Yom Tov falls on Erev Shabbos. The halacha tells us, the Gemara in Beitza, Ein Yom Tov meichin the Shabbos. You're not allowed to cook and prepare on Friday, which is Yom Tov, for Shabbos. You can't prepare Yom Tov, can't prepare for Shabbos. So disgracing the Yom Tov if I'm preparing for the next day. So what do? So the Gemara says, you make an Erev Tavshilin. How does an Erev Tavshilin work? An Erev Tavshilin means I'm started to cook on Thursday, which is before Yom Tov. Now I can continue to cook on Friday, which is Erev Shabbos, for Shabbos. Because I started already on the weekday, I made an Erev Tavshilin, now I can cook on Yom Tov for Shabbos. Says the MaHaral, what a beautiful yesod in our own lives right before the time of Mashiach, the coming time of Mashiach. If a person starts to work on himself, even if we can't reach full perfection, but we make some kind of a beginning on the weekday before Mashiach comes, then even in the time of Mashiach, you'll be able to continue the work that you started during the week, which was before Mashiach came. But says the MaHaral, the condition is to start now, when it's still the weekday before Mashiach comes. That, says the MaHaral, is the deeper meaning of Erev Tavshilin, which is how the MaHaral explains that Chazal tell us that Avraham Avinu kept every halacha, even the Erev Tavshilin, because it teaches us such an important lesson that we have to know that idea. There are many stories of the MaHaral. Maybe, in fact, I'll leave them for when we talk about the shul. But just to give you a couple of facts about the MaHaral. When the MaHaral was born, it saved many, many Yidden from a blood libel. The MaHaral was born, Kiyadua, during Leil HaSeder. Leil HaSeder was going on, with the night of Seder night, And it was the time there were loads of blood libels. At the time that they used to say that Jews would kidnap and kill young Christians and use their blood in order to bake their matzahs. So, as his mother went into labor to give birth to the MaHaral, it was during Seder night. So the guests at the Seder night ran out in order to get a midwife, someone to help with the labor, with the birth. At that time, exactly at that moment, there was a non-Jewish man walking through the non-Jewish quarter in Prague with a sack. In that sack was a dead body. His aim was, his goal was to plant the body in a place near the Yidden and then report the crime to the authorities, and then who knows what would happen, how many Yidden would be killed as a result. As the guests came running out of the MaHaral's mother's house in order to go and call the midwife, they came running out. So this guy with the sack of the dead body thought they were trying to catch him, and therefore he ran away, and therefore they managed to save many, many Yidden. So just his being born was that way. Just a second about his wife, that's also over here. According to the tradition that's passed down by many of the MaHaral's descendants, Pearl, the MaHaral's wife, was an incredible Talmidei Chachama. She was unbelievable. She helped her husband in some of his tshuvas, and she arranged many of his works. In fact, the Lubavitcher Rebbe brings down the following. He says that even if she sat and learned many, many hours, she sat and learned, she had chavrusos with her husband, the MaHaral. They learned Gemara, they learned halacha, they learned ethics, they learned metaphysics, all sorts of things. She said about herself that since she was 8 years old, not one day went by that she did not learn for at least 5 hours. After she married the MaHaral, many people would send him halacha shailas. She would read out the shaila, she would write down the replies. She edited and arranged many of the MaHaral's actual works, and it said that in 8 places at least she found mistakes in what her husband wrote when he quoted either a Gemara or Rashi, which is interesting. Now the Golem story we'll talk about a little bit when we get to the shul, but whatever it is, the MaHaral himself did not feel that making a Golem was anything extraordinary, because the Gemara brings that every Friday Reb Chanina, Reb Oshia would use the mystical Sefer, the Sefer Yetzirah, in order to create a calf in order to eat on Shabbos. So the MaHaral felt that, using Sefer Yetzirah, which has the divine names of Hashem, was basically just davening Ashrei Yeshu V'Secha. It wasn't a big deal. In fact, with the MaHaral, when he died on the 18th of Elul, it's the same day, 7 generations later, that the first Chabad Rebbe, the Heilige Baal HaTanya, was actually born. Which once again, a lot of what he wrote happens to be from here. And we'll end with just one last thing. Many people wrote Sfarim on the MaHaral, and one of the most recent works, the Pachad Yitzchak, written by Rav Hutner. Now on September the 6th, 1970, Rav Hutner and some of the family members were on TWA flight 741 when it was hijacked and it went to Entebbe. Together with many Yidden, they were captured and held over there by the terrorists. During that time, on the 18th of Elul, the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke at length about the hostage situation in Entebbe, and he said that the hours that Rav Hutner toiled over the teachings of the MaHaral, whose Yortzeit was that day, should stand him in a good way, and the MaHaral will save any Yid that learns anything about him. So Rabbi said we're in a Mokim Kodesh, we're in a Mokim, the MaHaral of Prague, which again, as we said and we quoted, so many tzaddikim and gedolim and rabbonim have got their hashpah from the MaHaral of Prague. Someone who understood what chinuch means, understood what teaching means, and is sort of giving over the Messiah. Let's daven, let's be mispadal, and at this time let's be mispadal also for ourselves, also for our families, but also let's remember Klal Yisrael. Let's remember the Eis sorrow that Klal Yisrael are going through at this moment of time in Eretz Yisrael and around the world. The uncomfortable situation of hostages, the army, the soldiers their lives are at risk every moment of the day. Let's remember Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael. Let's remember where Klal Yisrael is holding. Let's daven for the Geula. Let's daven that the Rabbi Shalom gives us siyata d'shmaya in our own lives, and our own Torah, and our own Yiddishkeit. And Be'ezah Hashem, all our tefillahs, Be'ezah Hashem for ourselves, for our mishpachas, and for Klal Yisrael will be answered the Tova.